Hey there, Margie Bryce here, bringing you the Crabby Pastor podcast. And I don't think you're going to be too surprised to know that it's too easy today to become the Crabby Pastor. Our time together will give you food for thought to help you be the ministry leader fully surrendered to God's purposes and living into whatever it takes to get you there and keep you there. So we're talking about sustainability in ministry. I think you have to grant me permission to your firstborn male child or something.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. This episode of the Crabby Pastor podcast is going in a direction of helpful leadership, practical leadership actions and activities that are going to benefit in some crisis situations. And I haven't really dabbled in that, although I am very adamant about giving practical helps for ministry. And so I guess this comes under this category. And I ran into Kari Lefebvre, who is a licensed professional counselor, correct me. Go ahead.
Professional.
Professional.
Licensed
okay.
professional. Yes.
See, I just don't know everybody's letters after their name. That's fine. And Kari and I had conversation, and I invited her on the podcast because I felt like she had some very interesting things to say and very helpful things to say to those who have leadership in the church or leadership in a nonprofit or just leadership ministry. I mean, what do you do? What do you do if someone comes to you needing help and they're in a crisis situation? So, but first I want, Kari, can you just tell us a little bit about who you help?
Yes, I help. My specialty is working with victims of abuse, domestic abuse, as well as narcissistic abuse. So I've been in the mental health field for over 20 years, but this is my private practice that I've been doing for a little while now. And that's who I reach out to and work with.
Okay. That is big stuff.
Yes.
Very big stuff. And that in itself is ministry, whether it is a faith-based conversation. One of your clients, are they predominantly faith-based?
Probably about half and half, faith-based. So okay. I do advertise as a Christian counselor because my faith is important to me and I am a Christian. And so I try to reach out to those people that might need. And I do it in a variety of different ways with partnerships and stuff.
Okay. So, and whether it's a faith-based session or not a faith-based session, they both, in my mind, fall under the category then of ministry. And this is your gift to and how you bless other people, which I think is the broad definition of ministry these days, especially out and about, in the general public square. But when you do work with faith-based clients, what kinds of challenges, unique challenges, do they face in comparison to non-faith-based? I'm just curious.
A lot of it is judgment from the Christian. I feel like it's easier for non-Christians to, if they're going to divorce, to go through a divorce process or to get therapy than it is for the Christian couples or clients that come see me, just because of the stance that a lot of churches take or a lot of people in the church take. Yeah. So it's a lot harder on them emotionally and mentally.
That's pretty interesting. So when they come to you, then there is an aspect of shame in addition to the traumas that they are going through. Would it be fair to say that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Bible talks about divorce and you're not supposed to get divorced and you're supposed to work on your marriage and pray. And, most of the time, if it's an abuse victim and it's female, they've tried to leave about 7 times before they actually get to the point where they can leave. And a lot of that is shame and embarrassment, and admitting that there's a failure, and they've tried everything at that point. When they get to that point, they've probably tried just about everything: pleading, praying, counseling, trying to work their marriage out.
So, which group would have the higher shame element to it? Would you say the faith-based group or the non-faith-based? Or are they about the same?
I would say the faith-based, because people that have gone to church, I mean, you and I are both lifers for church. I mean, that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
things you learn. You don't get divorced. And so people feel like no matter what the reason is, they're going to be judged.
Right, right. And I would say up front here that we are not campaigning for divorce per se, but
Right.
there are situations, especially when we're talking about abuse, that there are better ways that the church could be handling and offering their compassion and support. And yeah, sometimes if someone has gotten a divorce, then they are seen as less than, especially if there's an abuse situation, which not everybody, when you are in an abusive situation, it's not like you go get a flag that and wave it that says that. Usually those
Right.
kinds of situations are kept secret, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. Nobody abuses their partner, or very few people abuses their partner in public, right? Where everybody can see it. It's behind closed doors. And when you look at certain abusive personalities like narcissistic, to everybody out there, they look like a great person. But behind closed doors, the family really sees what the person's like. And I work with couples and clients, and sometimes they do stay married. It's working. Some couples are therapeutic, and you can talk to them and they can work and make goals for their marriage, and they can communicate better, and they can, you know, be able to repair their marriage and move forward and stay married. But sometimes it's just not an option.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I know one thing that is touted pretty heavily in the church is the idea that the couple has to stay together under all circumstances. And I'd like you to kind of expand on that in the difference between, say, a marriage and a biblical marriage.
Sure. So I see a lot of people that come to me, and when we were doing a consultation, they ask me how I feel about divorce. And we talk a little bit about that, because if they go to, a lot of times they've been to a pastor or a Christian life coach, and the person says, you cannot get divorced. You need to pray harder. You need to be a better wife or a better husband. And they have this list of things for people to do. But in an abusive marriage, it's not the same. You can't handle an abusive marriage, marital issues, the same as just a regular marital issues. Biblical marriage, there's not abuse. There's no screaming and yelling at your spouse and throwing things or hitting. That's not biblical. So you can't treat them like they're in a biblical marriage, because that's not a biblical marriage. It's not a biblical covenant at that point when somebody is misbehaving or abusing in a relationship.
Mm. Yeah, you said the key word there is covenant. When you stand and you give your, I promise to love and honor and cherish and all of those things, that you're describing publicly before other people the kind of covenant that you are making with this individual. And then to have it be broken because of an abuse situation is it's broken. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's not that it can't be repaired. It certainly could be repaired, but it takes very intentional effort to do so. Then there are the cases where the abuser is no way going down that path of, in fact, there's often gaslighting going on
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. So, you can go to your pastor, and if they have adequate training on the cycles of abuse, as in if there is an incident and it continues, that it's not going to ever get less and get better and improve. The cycle and the pattern of abuse is that it gets worse and worse and worse every time. So to send a woman back And most of the time it's women. I'm sure there's other situations where it's men, but majority of the time it's women.
Mhm.
So to send a woman back into a situation after she's had repeated abuse, you would be sending a woman back into a worsening scenario. And that's something that I'm trusting that pastoral training these days, highlights that. But again, you mentioned shame
Mhm.
and the role of shame in that.
Yeah, and I think when a pastor or a ministry leader says, "Hey, you got to work on this," the Bible says you can't get divorced, and they don't fully understand what they're dealing with. I've had women come to me and say, "This is just my lot in life. I made a bad choice when I got married, and this is what I have to do to serve God, is I've got to stay in this marriage and be hit or, have spit on or, abused financially." And I think it's interesting because we talk about men being the leaders of the house, but leadership it shouldn't be just in name. You're not just the leader because you're the man. Are you helping around the house? Are you helping with the children? There's other aspects of leadership that make up a biblical marriage as well.
Mm, yeah, yeah, yes. So I know that we talked at length about this part about grace and the role of grace in these pictures and how grace can be meted out. So if you allow someone, say, back into, and I'm shifting just a bit into, say, leadership, and there has been abuse going on. So now we're kind of gravitating a little bit more to not just a pastor dealing with, say, a lay couple or even another ministry couple coming to them and there's an abuse situation, but we're also talking about those who are in the hierarchy area and how to deal with, because all ministry leaders have a dark side. All of us do. And it's up to us to know the baggage that we carry and understand it. And that's, I could put in the show notes, Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership. And it's an amazing book that would be helpful. But how do you redeem? And I guess that's a spiritual word, right? How do you bring a leader back into leadership that maybe has gone in the realm of abuse?
I follow Diane Langberg. She's a Christian psychologist, and she's been 50 years in the trauma group, and she does things with churches, and I would highly recommend anything from her that she's written. But she talks about holding accountable the abuser accountable, and part of that accountability is we don't let them back into a role where they can be deceiving again. It makes it really easy. So if they were leadership in doing something within the church, leading kids worship, I don't know, and we give them that role back after they've changed or said they changed, we're putting them back in the position where they were able to lie to everybody around them except for their family. And we're basically enabling them to continue to abuse. And so the kindest way to hold the person accountable is really not to put them in the situation where they can do it again. You can't really ask the wife, like, "Hey, how's everything at home?" or ask the kids, because you're asking the abuse victim to rat out their abuser. And most of the time, that's not going to happen because there's consequences at home. If that would happen and the wife would say, "Oh, yeah, he hit me," or something like that, there's going to be consequences. And most of the time, women can't make it out on their own.
And this is a tricky thing, whether you're talking about abusive situations within ministry leadership households or regular households. I mean, if you encounter an abuse situation, it's tricky to navigate it through, say, the arrest and court system. Because if a woman goes to the ER and she has bruises and says to the nurse, yeah, my husband did this, they're going to, by law, they have to call the police. So the police show up and the police will say things like, now, I can write this report up, but then you have to follow through and press charges, or this isn't any help to anyone. But then you might get into, say, a situation with a judge, attorney, court officials that say, I don't know that we can press this and make this stick because nobody saw the abuse happen. They just see the end result. Mm-hmm. So this is just a snippet, maybe, of what women who face abuse situations have to deal with, along with the emotional trauma, in trying to figure out how to navigate and how to hold accountable someone who is abusive. I mean, what kind of input and can you offer us about holding accountable somebody who is abusive?
I like the thought of not putting them in a position to do it again, and putting them in that same role. But I also think it's important. We like grace. Christians love grace, a good grace story. Somebody's changed. But when you put somebody back in that role, you have to think about what it can do to the victims and how the victims are going to feel. And I guess a lot of times we don't think about that. We think this person's changed. We really want to believe them, because who wants to believe that the person never changed, that they're just saying they've changed? But a true person that's changed isn't going to be begging for their position back. They're not going to be demanding. They're going to understand they really messed up, and they're going to not expect to be in a role of leadership anymore because they lost it. If me as a therapist, if I am ever in an abusive situation, I can lose my license. Like, it's one and done. They can take me, like, they forever. Can file a sum forever. I don't get a second chance. Mm-hmm. So I think that accountability is a must, because you're asking somebody who is dishonest in how they were abusing or being abusive behind closed doors to be honest about change. And I just don't know if those two go together.
Mm. Yeah. And you and I were talking earlier, and I said it's almost like, putting somebody back into a place where they can abuse again, or have the possibility that abuse could occur, the same spot where abuse did occur, is a lot like loading your pockets with quarters and putting your friend on the airplane to Vegas and putting them up in a hotel casino thing and thinking that they're not going to gamble. Why would you even take a chance? And just for the record here, I think that was the last time I was in a casino, was when they had cups of quarters. I don't know what they do now, but I got to believe, I don't know. Anyway, just putting that out there. So we, like you said, and I'm like this because one of my sons said to me, "Oh, Mom, you're going to love this movie." And I said, "Oh, really? What makes you say that?" I was really curious. And he says, "Because it has a happy ending. You always like a happy ending." And I thought, this is true. I do not like it when the dog dies at the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. I just rebel against that. And as Christians, I think that's our orientation a bit, is to want that happy ending and want that good story to share and to tell. And it somehow is not when the person is, "Oh, you mean they can't do that anymore? I really like that," but they're not thinking of the big picture, I think. Anyway, do you have anything you want to weigh in on?
I think it's a hard situation, because people can be great leaders and have a background that nobody know, like we talked about earlier, behind closed doors. And so it's hard to believe that things are going on at home when they're so good in their leadership roles. And so mm-hmm. to find somebody else to replace, we all know churches are shorthanded, or mm-hmm. ministries as a whole mm-hmm. are shorthanded. So you have somebody willing to help out, you want to use them, So I think that's a hard spot for churches.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you and I talked, and I think you mentioned earlier here already that an abused woman attempts to leave like seven mm-hmm. times. What can you unpack that for us? And what is that like?
Well, I think for a woman, like, depending on the background, I know I have clients who have left and can't make it financially, or start to leave, and then they get promises, like I'll change, I promise I'll change, or the love bombing, where that's a narcissistic term, where the person leaves and the spouse is sending them gifts and just being overly nice and just acting like they did in the beginning. And so they get sucked back in, or they manipulate them, like, let's try it again for the kids. We don't want to put our kids through this. And no, you don't want to put your kids through it. Nobody wants to put their kids through a divorce. It's heartbreaking. So it's different ways of manipulation and different, maybe they don't have a place to stay. I have, clients who stay with friends. Like, it's amazing what doors can open for people, but it's not an easy road for 90% of my clients to leave. And, first time, I don't have anybody, I don't think, that's left the first time. And usually by the time they've come to me, they filed 2 or 3 times, or, situations like that.
So this is abuse victims are people that want the relationship to change. They want it to work out. They have tried everything that they can think of. And I would say, if at all possible, see if the relationship can be redeemed, but there could come a point where divorce is the final option. And we talk some too about what to avoid, what ministry leaders can avoid. And certainly they can avoid putting the victim in a position to report if there's abusive situations happening at home. That can be, as I recounted, a bit of a circus in the legal system, that unless you're in an area that is very supportive of women who are in trauma situations, women really are not in a position of power at that moment, right?
Absolutely. And, I have male clients too. So sometimes it's the male that's not in the position of power. Maybe they were the stay at home, or they make less money. But one thing's common in all of this: there's one person working on the marriage. It's not 2 people working. It's always just one of the partners working to repair. And I think that that's an important thing. Like, you can give lip service and say, yes, I'm trying to work, the abusive partner, but if they're not coming to therapy and they're not working on what they need to work on, then they're not working to repair the relationship. And one person can't do that on their own.
Right. And it's not just working on the relationship. It's trying to restore the covenant that they agreed upon at the get-go, would you say?
Oh, for sure. And we, as a therapist, it's very dangerous to enter counseling with an abuser, with a narcissistic abuser, because they turn things around. They have a way of manipulating. So that's always tricky too. Sometimes it's not good for women to go into therapy, or a man with their abuser.
Can you say more about that? I'm not sure I totally get the whole narcissistic abuser. It's a special class, it sounds like, of abuser in some respects, but
well, narcissistic abuse is one of those situations. I like to say part of it is extreme selfishness. It's all about them. And to the world, they may be very gifted in their ministerial roles or at their job. They may be really high up at a company. There's a few jobs that have high rates of narcissism in. So yeah, so to everybody else, they look like the nicest guy, and they look like, or the nicest gal. And then when they get home, everything's about them. They're very controlling with finances. They're very controlling with food. They're very controlling, they control and manipulate how they want things around the house. It's like walking on eggshells is, I guess, the best way my clients describe it. Like, the person comes home and you're like, oh goodness, am I going to get the angry, the nice, the frustrated? What am I getting today when they walk in? And when there's a conflict, the abused usually just towers, doesn't give their opinion, because if they do, they're going to get screamed at, told they're dumb. The narcissists make the passive aggressive jokes, like, oh, comments about, and then when you try to stand up for yourself, oh, that was a joke, I was just joking, haha, and it wasn't a joke. It's, you just called them out, and so they came around with it. So it's a narcissism's in their own class, because it's hard for the people around to believe that person's abusive, just because of the persona they put on outside of the house and how successful they are. So
Mm.
there's a high rate of, for example, narcissism in doctors. They have a really important job. They sometimes they call it the God complex, right? Because they do
Mm-hmm.
surgeries. And I'm not saying all narcissists or all doctors are narcissists by any stretch, but there's a high rate of narcissism within doctors. So that's just an example.
Mm. And I want to say right now, if you are under a situation or in a situation where you are experiencing abuse, what would you say, Kari? Then what would be your best advice to someone experiencing that right now?
I think finding a therapist that specializes in trauma or abuse is very beneficial because sometimes I have clients that don't even realize they're being abused. Sometimes they just come in and say like I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, and they don't realize it until you start to unpack it. And so I think therapy is one of the best tools to get help and see if you can repair that relationship and bring the partner in if possible and try to work on some marital counseling to see if you can fix your relationship. So I would say if they're in an abusive situation, certainly look for counseling. And there's, if you're in Michigan, there's Psychology Today, and you can search by your insurance and what you want to talk about. So if it's abuse, you can put abuse, and you have Blue Cross. And if you want to go person or online, and they'll populate all the people that meet your standards. So it's not hard to find somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely reach out to somebody, get some help from someone that you trust. And if you get the advice to go back into that situation and just pray and everything will be okay, then you will know that the person giving you that advice has not been schooled in cycles of abuse and does not understand that it is a trap, I think, a cage that it's difficult to get out of. So they don't have that understanding. So you need to find somebody who does have that understanding. Actually, that would be the best. What else would you like to offer before we close up here? Kari, a couple of good reminders.
Well, I think I want to tell leadership leaders that reaching out is one of the best things you can do, especially when someone's feeling shamed because they're going through a divorce or separation. Reach out to that person, see if they're okay. Is there anything you can do to help? Sometimes they need food, sometimes they need shelter, sometimes they need a gas card, like anything you can do to help. And I think that is really important. And I think it's leadership members of leadership need to understand it's okay to refer to out. I have a friend that's a pastor, and I remember he said to me once, I can counsel people, I can do biblical counseling, but I'm not a mental health professional. So if somebody needs more help, they need to go to someone. And that's how he starts all of his sessions. And I thought that was fabulous because nobody's going to be offended if their pastor or minister leader says like, hey, I don't specialize. I don't know how to handle this. So I'm going to refer you over here to this person that can help you with your problems. I'd rather have them do that than try to convince somebody to stay and pray, because that doesn't work in abusive situations. And then one of the other thing is like encourage kindness from your congregation. I have a client that receives Bible verses from people in her congregation telling her why she shouldn't get divorced, and it was an
Mm,
extremely abusive relationship, bruises, things like that. And it's just like, and people probably don't know that, but it's really none of their business. And it's so hurtful for her to get these cards and these letters telling her, I'm praying for you, and giving her a Bible verse. And so try to encourage the kindness of just how they tread with abusers. And don't forget the kids. That's the other thing. So if
mhm.
there's kids in the situation, have the youth leader or the Bible or the Sunday school teacher or whatever kind of ministry it is, have them reach out to the kids, take the kids out for lunch, whatever, get them out of the house, let them have time to just talk. And maybe they'll share stuff, maybe they won't, but they need normalcy too, and they need to process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The kids and cycles of abuse can be perpetuated in the next generation. And sometimes what ministry leaders need to understand is, to be the person or the spouse that stands up and says, this is not okay. this cycle of abuse is going to stop in this generation, that's a very brave thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always a guarantee, but it certainly is an attempt to say this cycle is going to stop here. And for especially for women, men go through that too, but especially for women who frequently don't have a leg up financially, who have not been empowered, not been in a relationship and an environment that is empowering. That's a big thing. That's
Mm-hmm.
a huge thing. And yeah, okay, I'm certainly not going to debate statements like God hates divorce. Okay. I had people, quote that one. And that's true. That's true. But I don't think that God condones a broken covenant. That, again, go back to that. I always want to say, hey, you invite us all to the wedding and we've heard all these lovely platitudes. I would say everybody that attends your wedding would have the right to show up on your doorstep and say, hey, how's it going in terms of all these things that you promised, this
Mm-hmm.
covenant that you had us all witness. And so if you go back to that covenant and that requirement, I don't think God loves that if it's not being upheld and you have experienced the abusive ranks in your home life. I don't think God loves that either. And I don't think it does good things for the kids. And, I've
No.
heard people rationalize, we just never know what character thing this is going to cultivate in your kid. And I'm thinking, you know, now that I know things about cycles of abuse, that it can impact kids grow up and just think that's the norm
Mm-hmm.
and they
Yes.
perpetuate it.
I have clients that are getting divorced now, and it's like, but he married somebody just like his mom was, right? And there was abuse from his mom to his dad, and that was normal to him. And so it's like when you look at those kind of things, yeah. And what I like to say, it was a life-saving divorce. Those are the divorces that need to happen because they're saving somebody's life, and whether it be the kids and not continuing the cycle, or the spouse that's being abused, it's, to me, it's considered a life-saving divorce.
Mm. Well, I am going to stop us there. And again, I'm going to restate that if you or someone you know and love and care about is in an abusive situation, that they should seek help and not feel ashamed about seeking help and not feel that, oh, I didn't pray enough. I didn't read my Bible enough. I didn't this, I didn't that. And this individual is still the same. I'm being hurt, whether it's mentally, physically, emotionally, or however. Get some help and just start talking it through with somebody. Pastors are usually trained, 3 sessions and I'm out because I'm not a mental health. That's what I was trained to do. I'm not a mental health professional. And ministry leaders, if you're hearing this, then I think it behooves you to get some names of Christian counselors. And I'm sure some of the counselors wouldn't mind chatting with you. It's, so that you could feel comfortable about that referral. But you should have a few, that's more than two names on hand of people that you would feel confident in referring someone who is being abused to. So I think we've covered a lot here, but for sure, if you know of someone, please don't just ignore it, but go at it and go at it with a lot of compassion and love and care and certainly prayer. You would want to be praying for those individuals as well. I'm definitely not saying don't pray or that it doesn't make any difference. Prayer could give someone the courage to stand up and face a very broken covenantal situation. Hey friends, the Krabby Pastor podcast is sponsored by Bryce Art Glass, and you can find that on Facebook. I make stained glass, that's part of my self-care, and also by Bryce Coaching, where I coach ministry leaders and business leaders. And so the funds that I generate from coaching and from making stained glass is what is supporting this podcast. And I will have opportunities for you to be a part of sponsoring me. And as always, you can do the buy me a cup of coffee thing in the show notes. But I will have some other ways that you can be a part of getting the word out about the importance of healthy self-care for ministry leaders. Hey, thanks for listening. It is my deep desire and passion to champion issues of sustainability in ministry and for your life. So I'm here to help. I stepped back from pastoral ministry, and I feel called to help ministry leaders create and cultivate sustainability in their lives so that they can go the distance with God and whatever plans that God has for you. I would love to help. I would consider it an honor. And in all things, make sure you connect to these sustainability practices, so that you don't become the crabby pastor.